Okay, so yesterday we discussed a woman who was in limbo. She was on her way with the shluchim of the Baal to the Baal, and she was mezana. So she's not really Nesua yet, but she's not an Arusa because she's already in her husband's shluchim's possessions. So therefore, she was in the middle. Since she was in the middle, the Gemara brings a raya from a pasuk because this is like a special case that's in limbo. The Gemara brings a pasuk of Kiyira Naira Besula Mayrasala Ish. I'm sorry. The Gemara brings a pasuk of Ami brings a pasuk of Liznai's base aviyah. When is she chayiv skila? Only if she's purely base aviyah. If she's not purely base aviyah, like in our case where she's in limbo, because even though she's technically not a Nesua, but she's already with the shluchim of the Baal, the pasuk teaches us there that there's no chayiv skila. Frek the Gemara, how do you know that that's what the pasuk's teaching us? Maybe that's not considered out of the father's household enough to take her away from chayiv skila. And maybe this special pasuk of Liznai's Beis Aviyah is talking about a different case, where in fact she was in a Nesua, but she was not Nivala. And maybe that's what the pasuk is telling us. She doesn't get skila anymore because the fact that she was Nesua. Now that Rava responded that we have another pasuk for that. The pasuk of Ma'irasa, V'loi Nesua, tells us that. Because the pasuk of Ma'irasa, which is excluding Nesua, cannot be referring to a case where this woman was already a Be'ula. Because for that, we have another miyut of Besula V'loi Be'ula. So Elalav, Shenichsa L'chuppah V'nivala is what we learn out of this pasuk of Ma'irasa La'ish. And therefore, Liznai's Beis Aviyah is an extra pasuk to tell us that even before the Nesuin, once she's given over to the Shluchei Baal, no longer would there be a chiv skila if she's mezana. There's only a chiv chenek. That was how we finished yesterday. Now the Gemara is going to ask not a kasha on what we said, but another question. What if, if she did Nesuin, so that's not revocable, it's irrevocable, it's done, it's a chalois. But if she's just traveling with them, granted, while she's traveling with them, we consider her in limbo, and therefore the pasuk of Liznai's Beis Aviyah will exclude a woman in such a situation. But what if on her way with the Shluchei Baal, she decides, you know what, I don't like this, I want to go home. And she goes back home. Now, everyone knows if someone becomes Nesua, no matter what happens after that, even if she gets divorced and she goes back home, she's no longer going to ever be chayiv skila, only chenek. She's no longer a murasa. But this woman, all she did was she went with the shluchei Baal. So maybe if she decides that she wants to leave, maybe she goes back into her original status of an arusa, and therefore there would still be a chayiv skila. That's what the Gemara is probing. The Ema more asks Shashayla as follows: Heicha de hadra lebeinosa. If she went back home to her father and she wanted to abort this marriage, hadra lemilsa kamais, maybe she would once again be chayiv skila, of course, until her husband gives her a get. Amarava zokrava, no, that wouldn't be the case. Hukvar paska Tanu Devar Rabbi Shmuel. Tanu Devar Rabbi Shmuel already taught us that even in this case, where she went back to her father's household, once she was already with the Shluchei Habal, she's no longer chayiv skila, and she won't go back to the chayiv skila. The Tanya, because we learned. The Tanya Devar Rabbi Shmuel. It says in the pasuk, in the parsha of Nedarim, of course, the neder almana ugrusha, kol asher osra al nafsha yokamala. A neder that an almana makes or a grusha makes. Now she's a woman who is obviously not in the domain of her father, because she was already once fully married, and she's also not in the domain of her husband because she's either divorced or widowed. Yet the pasuk still sees the need to tell us that her nedarim are mekuyim. No one is made for them. Why did the pasuk need to specifically mention almana and grusha? we would already know without the pasuk telling us their status, what their status would be. Because we know that the father at this point, once she becomes an asua, has absolutely no rights to her nedarim. And she doesn't have a husband. So obviously there's no husband who's going to have any control over her nedarim. So of course she's on her own. Why would the pasuk have to make a special mention of a neder almana grusha that her nedarim are mekuyim? Ella, what the pasuk must be referring to is a case where there's a little bit of a chiddush. If the father gave over his daughter to the shluchim of the Baal, or the shluchim of the father gave over this woman to the shluchim of Baal, and she became an almana, or she was an iskarsha. So at that point, what is she? What do we consider her? Because she's really what we would say in Yiddish, nishtahin, inishtaher. Is she beis aviyah shalzu? Does she go back to her father's household once she had already been in the possession of her husband's shluchim? Or beis baila shalzu? Or is she still in the beis baal? And therefore her father doesn't make for her anymore. The pasuk's telling you, Kivan sheyotza shah achas rishus ha'av. Once she left the rishus ha'av, the moment she was given over by the father or her shluchim to the shluchei habal, she now left the rishus ha'av. The father loses his control over her nedarim. Shuv eina yachol lahav. He could no longer be mefer at all, and that's the chiddush. The chiddush is that even the mesiris from the Av's domain to the Shluchei Baal, to the husband's domain, even that, Lagabe Nidorim, is irrevocable. And she never goes back to her original state. And therefore, our shayla that we had, where if she was Nimshar L'Shluchei Baal, and then she went back, would she once again be Chayiv Skila? The answer is no, because of this limud, Kivan Shiyotza, Sha'achas Mishus Av, once she leaves the state of her father, whether it's for Nedarim or whether it's for the Chiv Skila to the Chiv Chenek, there's no turning back the clock. Shuv Eino Yachal. It doesn't go back. Let's see Rashi. El Haresha Masar, just to the right, about a half inch up. Kloimar, Loiba Akosov Lalmona Ulugrusha Minanasuin. Surely the pasuk is not coming to teach us that an almana or a grusha from the Suin doesn't go back to her father's household, because that's obvious. Daksivba in base Isha Nadara. If she's in the household of her husband, she's a married woman, then Isha Yefiredu. Bahare ein Isha Kayin. In this case, there is no husband. So what must the pasuk be referring to when it says V'neder almana grusha? It must be referring to El almana al yedei mesira shluch. She's an almana not from a nesuin, rather just from the state of her already being given over to the shluchim of the Baal. So far in the parsha of Nedarim, the Torah has not yet told us what the status is, only for Ela Mishpat Neideres Beveis Aviyah, Mishpat Neideres Beveis Isha. The Torah tells us what the status is with Nedarim, whether when she's in her father's household or when she's completely in her husband's household. But this is a hybrid. But this woman made a neder while she was on the road, once she was already given over to the shluchim of the Baal. I don't know how to refer, how to classify, how to categorize this woman. In Beis Aviyah, in Beis Isha, what is she? She's nishteh there. That's why the Torah made a special pasuk to clarify her status. Don't consider a woman in the household of her father, Ella Beis Isha. Once she's given over to the shluchim, she's called Beis Isha. And therefore, unlike if she's an arusa, if the husband dies, everything drains back into the father's rishus. Once she's already given over to the shluchei Baal, even if the Baal is removed from the picture, whether it's through Gershon, whether it's through Misa, whatever schus he had in her doesn't just drain back into her father's rishus. And therefore, Veshuv Eina Yachal, the father can no longer be mefer the nedarim of this woman. Alma, what you see from here is Loy Hadra Lamilsa Kamaisa. Even giving her over to the Shluchei Baal is irrevocable. It doesn't just dissolve and restore itself to the last login. No, it doesn't restore itself to the last time before, to her status before she was given over and go back into her father's household. She does not do that. The Elin is Armalum in the Erisin if her husband died when she was only in Arusa, Achaloi Nimsur Shluchim, before she was given over to the Shluchim, Tanan B'Mesachas Nedorim. The Gemara tells us in the Dorim, Meis Habal Nisroikna Rishus Lav. Whatever schus the husband had will drain back into the father's rishus. But this woman, who's a step further than Erishin, she's already given over l'shluchei Baal, even if the Baal is eliminated through Gershon or through Misa, the father doesn't restore his control. When they turn away. So the father or the shluchim give her over to their caravan, or she gets into their car, right? And they say bye, and they turn away. It's pretty practical. Okay. Zok to Gemara, Amar Papa Af Anan Nami Tanina. And Rashi says, what exactly are we trying to bring a raya to? So to Rashi, Af Anan Nami Tanina b'masnisin kahi braysa the Tanya Leil Harezu b'chenek. So we're going back to our original shayla. Once a woman is given over to the shluchei habal, so she's in limbo. She's not an arusa anymore, but she's definitely not full nesua. She's no longer an arusa lagabe the halacha of skila. Now, if she's mizana, she will get chenek. Okay, so Zok to Gemara, Afananamitanina, Haba al Nair Hamurasa. If someone is Ba al Nair Murasa, someone does Nus with a Nair Murasa, Einoi Chayev, he will not be Chayev Skila. Ad Shetahei Naira, she has to be a Naira, she has to be a Basula, and she has to be Murasa, and Vihi Beves Avia. So there's this extra word of Vihi Beves Avia. Bishlam a Naira V'loi Boigris, we understand that. Once she's a Boigris, when she's fully matured, she no longer gets chenek. She no longer gets skila. She gets chenek. Besula v'loy bula, that we understand as well. If she's a bula, she gets chenek. Murasa v'loy nesua, we understand. But what is this extra expression that the Tana is saying? Bevesavia, lemute mai. What is the Tana trying to teach us with this extra word of bevesavia? Lav lemute masar av l'shluchei Baal. The Tana is trying to tell us that even if she's not nesua yet, if she was merely passed over to the Shluchei Baal, she no longer gets skila. Now she's subject to chenek. We have another brisa that supports the same halacha, and the brisa says, if someone is Baal Eishish, kivan shenichnasa l'rishus habal, once she gets in to the rishus habal l'nesuin, so this is like an extra kivan. It could have said kivan shenisis, but it's a funny notion of kivin shenichlas alojus habal l'nesuin. Ava b'shloi nivela, even though she wasn't nivela, she's going to be habala reisa bechenek. So what does it mean nichlas alojus habal? Nichlas alojus habal ma'alma shmamina. We see that even if she's not nesua, but she's merely nichlas alojus habal, meaning she was given over to the Baal shluchim, she's no longer an ayah murasa l'gabe chiyav skila, and she's like a regular eishish who's only chayav chenek. Okay, gewaltig. Zog the hele Gemara weiter. Rabbi Rosner, he always gets off topic, and he says, being that we're talking about Parsha Nedarim, I want to mention to you a very interesting thought that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said about Nedarim. And it's funny that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky's sefer is, I think, Emes Liakov, and he was very makar of the Midas Emes. We all know that he only ended up in America because of the Midas Emes, because he was obliged by the koil that he was in. I think it was the Kavla koil. to raise money. All of the Yimalite were forced to come to America at their turn and raise money. And he had to do the same. And he felt that the office was sending receipts out, even maybe bigger than the donations pledged. They would send the receipts out in advance of getting paid, and they would send it out for a couple more dollars than were actually pledged, because maybe the guy will give it. Now that he pledges 100, and they send him a receipt for 180, maybe he'll give 180, right? So Rebecca felt that was not how he wants to conduct himself, and he said, I can't do this anymore, but I still owe the koil money. So instead, he took a job in America, and he sent all his money back to the koil, and that's how he fulfilled his responsibility. So in Parashas Matos, which I believe is the Parasha of the Dorim, it says Zeh Hadavar Asher Tziva Hashem. The Rashi says Zeh Hadavar. It says Zeh Hadavar Moshe Nisnabe B'Koy Amar Hashem Kechatzos Alayla V'Navim Nisnabu B'Koy Amar Hashem. So in that respect, the level of Nevuah of Moshe was on the same level as the level of Nevuah to the rest of the Nevi'im. But then Rashi says, Moshe Falei Moshe Shenisnabe B'Loshen Zeh Hadavar. Moshe's Nevuah was superior to the Nevuah of all the Nevi'im, who were only Nisnabe with Koyamar, and he was Nisnabe with Zeh Hadavar. So Rabbi Yaakov Shtolzach, first of all, what is so unique about Zeh Hadavar? And B, if in fact there is something special about Zeh Hadavar, Moshe Rabbeinu has been hearing Nevuah since Sefer Shemos. Why does the Torah wait till Parshas Matos, which is all the way at the end of Moshe's career, to be Nisnabatim and Zeh Hadavar? What's unique about this parsha that the Torah decides to use Zeh Hadavar here? So Rabbi Yaakov explains that one of the simonim of a Navi Sheker is if two Nevi'im verbatim say the same thing. That is a sign of a Navi Sheker. And the reason for it is Rabbi Yaakov, is the Nevi'im never heard with clarity exactly what the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted. It was all in a fuzzy type of way. It wasn't with clarity. Therefore, every Nevuah lent itself to interpretation. And every Navi's Nevuah was cloaked in the Navi's own personal perspective of how to understand it, not to give it over. And since no two people think exactly alike, it would be impossible for two Nevi'im to come up with verbatim the same tzivui, because it would show that this is collusion and planned and not really their perspective of how they understood the Nevuah. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, when he heard Nevuah from Hashem, it was literally like the Rebbeinu was dictating to him word for word what to say, because Moshe had full clarity. There was no room for interpretation. Moshe's Nevuah had clarity, and that is the lashon of Zeh Hadavar that the Torah uses to describe this Nevuah. And where do you find it? You find Zeh Hadavar when we had to build a menorah. We find lashon of Zeh Chodesh Zeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. Zeh, this is what the moon should look like. Whenever it's clear like day, like you're pointing to something that looks exactly like this, that's when the word Zeh is appropriate. And Moshe Rabbeinu was zocheh to the word Zeh. So Frank Rabbi Yaakov, so why over here? Why over here did Hashem use the word Zeh with him rather than in his earlier nevuos? Zokt Rabbi Yaakov, unbelievable. That is, normally a human cannot create an isser. The Torah lists off what's muter, what's asur. The only place where you find a human could make an isser is by the parsha of the Torah. This piece of cake could be muter, and you could say, I'm making a neder from this cake, and now it's not, now it's asur. So you could literally create isurim. Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu is telling Klal Yisrael, you could create isurim, well, automatically Klal Yisrael will say, hey, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu also made things up, because you see, sometimes you could make things up. Therefore, by this nevuah, it was especially important to tell Klal Yisrael that the Moshe's nevuah was Zeh Hadavar. Everything Moshe Rabbeinu said was 100% accurate. He didn't make anything up. And exactly by the Parasha of Nedorim, where you do see people could create isurim, there Hashem is saying testimony to Moshe Rabbeinu that he made nothing up. Everything he gave over was word for word exactly how the Rebbeinu Shalom dictated it to him. That's the part from Yaakov Kamenetsky. I thought that was up to a cute part. Okay, so up to the Gemara. We have a new Mishnah. Ha'av einoi chayiv b'mezaynos bitoi. A father is not muchayiv to support his daughter. And Rashi says that means b'chayov. This means over the age of 6. The Gemara is going to get, in today's daf, we're going to learn about what the father's responsibilities are to his children, A, and B is what options we have if he doesn't want to fulfill his responsibilities. So he's not chayiv b'mezonos b'noi either, and Rashi points out right away, we're going to have to understand why the Mishnah focuses on the daughter. The first day when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became Rosh Yeshiva and his beard became all white, and he took over the yeshiva of Keren B'Yavne, which was called that because the boy sat in rows, so it looked like the neat rows of a vineyard. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah darshaned many things that day, and one of the things they darshaned is Habanim Yershu, the children, the sons are yours. So you might ask, that's his takana? That's the Torah. That's the Torah. The sons are yours. So Rashi explains that what Habanim Yershu means as follows. Imagine you're marrying off a daughter. Let's not get personal. Imagine someone is marrying off a daughter, and I'm not referring to what we discussed yesterday. Imagine, well, maybe I am. Listen to this. A guy's marrying off a daughter, right? And he wants to give his daughter $1 million of nadin, right? He doesn't want to give it to his son-in-law. He wants to give it to his daughter. Unfortunately, they're married, so her son-in-law by default is going to get his claws on your hard-earned money. But he's concerned. What happens if my daughter marries this guy? There's $1 million trust fund for them, and my daughter Baruch Hashem has a couple of sons. Let's say she has 2 sons, and then she dies. What's going to happen with that $1 million? It's going to go to the husband. That's bad enough. That's painful enough that your son-in-law is getting the $1 million that you really wanted your daughter to enjoy. But you could rest assured, at least, that when your son-in-law dies, who's going to get the money? Your eniklach, your children. So therefore, it doesn't bother you so much. If there's anything left, that's right. But the problem is, what's going to happen if the son-in-law remarries another woman, and her father gave her $100,000 of nadin? Now it's getting uncomfortable because he has his this son-in-law has his claws on my money, and there's another wife there that's going to party hardy off my money. And what's going to happen if she dies, and then he dies? But before she dies, she has 10 sons. So I left over 2 Einiklach. There's 2 Einiklach there that could split $1 million. He's going to have $1 million. She brought in $100,000 into the marriage, and she has 10 kids. So now, altogether, there's 12 kids, and there's $1,100,000. And that has to be split evenly because the husband yarshin it. Now the husband's estate is $1,100,000, and he's got to split it amongst 12 kids. Each kid's not even going to get $100,000. So here, after I gave $1 million, barely $200,000 are going to go to my eniklach, and some other woman's kids are going to get all my money. You know what? I am not giving any nadin. I don't need that. I'm not looking to give her kids money. So because of that, they wrote a Tanai in the Ksuba called the Tanai of Kesubos Benin Dichrin. And what that is that we make a star Ksuba. The husband says, when I die, all of the nadin that I got from you, that part will go exclusively to your children. So every wife is guaranteed, or every shver is guaranteed, that if that money ends up by the husband because his wife dies, because his daughter dies, at least he's guaranteed that that money will not be split evenly amongst all the children of this deceased man. Rather, it'll be earmarked to be split only amongst the shver zeinah. That is the ksuba of B'din Dichrin, and it was done so people shouldn't be so afraid and so hesitant to give their son-in-laws not. So that's Habanim Yershu. The Habanoi Shezulu. There's another ksuba B'din Dichrin, and that is, there's another Tanai ksuba That is, if he dies, every every man tells his wife, if I die, the girls will be able to have sustenance off of my money, off of my estate. So, Dr. Mishnah, there's a similarity in between these two takanas. Ma bonim, einim yarshin elul achamisav. Just like the sons will not yarshin any of the money until the father dies. While the father is alive, the money surely belongs to the father. Afabonois, so to the daughters, eini zoynois elul achamisavim. They are only entitled to mezainos after their father dies. While their father is alive, they have no claim whatsoever to any mezainos. Beautiful. Let's be medayik from this Mishnah to get clarity of what the halacha is. It says Av is not chayv b'mezainos bitay. So zok to Gemara, the mezainos bitay hu de'ein chayv. There's no chiyuv to support his daughters. Ha b'mezainos b'noi chayv. It would make sense to make a deal. The Mishnah just says bitay, so it must be that there's a chiyuv to give mezainos to your son. As far as bitay nami chayv dalak. There's no chiyuv, so you can't be forced, you can't be coerced. But ha mitzvah ika, there's still a mitzvah to support his daughter. So what have we concluded is the message of the Mishnah, that there's a chiyuv mandatory to support your children, your sons, and it's only a mitzvah to feed your daughters. Zok Gemara, mani masnisim. Now that we've clarified the position of the Mishnah, we now need to find an author for this position, because all of the three people that we know discuss this do not agree with the information that we just gleaned from the Mishnah. Lo Rabbi Meir, lo Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbi Yochanan Mabreka. The Tanya we learned, mitzvah lozun es abonos. There's a mitzvah, not a chiyuv, but a mitzvah to support your daughters. That's good. But kal v'chomer levanim, there's a mitzvah, not a chiyuv. Why? The oski b'Torah, because they learn Torah. Since they learn Torah, there's kal v'chomer, a mitzvah to support them. So let's think about this. This is inconsistent, because sure, the diuk we make for the Mishnah is such that there's a mitzvah to be mazin the banos, but we were medayik from the Mishnah that there's a chiyuv to be mazin banos. Clearly, the Tanakama doesn't say that. They're very Meir. Rabbi Yehuda has a second position. Mitzvah lozun es abanim. It's only a mitzvah to feed your sons. That's already inconsistent with what we were medayik for the Mishnah, because we were medayik for the Mishnah that there's a chiyuv to be mazin the banim. The kal v'chomer b'banos, and banos as well have to. There's a chiyuv. Again, that's not how we learned the Mishnah. What's the kal v'chomer b'banos? Mishum zilusa. It's very humiliating, and no one wants their daughters to be so shamed that they don't have what to eat. And Rabbi Yochanan Mabreka Omer, chayva lozon es banos lacha misas avim. There's a chiyuv to feed the girls after their father dies. They get nothing at all. Our Mishnah is not consistent with either one of these three positions. You're a mayor. If you want to say it's going to be a mayor, ha'amar banim mitzvah. He said banim is a mitzvah, and we learned from our Mishnah banim is a chayv. Ha'amar banim nami mitzvah. Banim and banim are a mitzvah, yet we hold banim as a chayv. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Bereika afilu mitzvah namaleka. According to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no mitzvah at all. Zok tomorrow, I could actually explain our Mishnah that it'll be consistent with what all these three Tanoim said. And we'll go through this one at a time. Ibai Yisem Rabbi Meir, Ibai Yisem Rabbi Yehuda, Ibai Yisem Rabbi Yochanan ben Bereika. Ibai Yisem Rabbi Meir. What did Rabbi Meir say? That there's a mitzvah to support the banos, and there's a mitzvah to support the banim, but there's no chiyuv. This is how he would be medayik from the Mishnah, unlike the way we did earlier. The father is not chayiv in the mezainos of his daughter. For who adin livnoi, we're not making a diuk to exclude benoi. No, ben is the same as the daughter. So then you would ask, why did the Mishnah specify bitoi if in fact the same thing applies to benoi? The Gemara is going to get to that in just a minute. Ha mitzvah bitoi ika. There is a mitzvah to support the daughter, to give the daughter mezainos. Kavachayim levanim. Surely there's a mitzvah according to Reb Meir to support banim because they learn Torah. So why did the Mishnah use bitoi if in fact, according to Reb Meir, the halacha of bas is the same as the halacha of ben? Kamash Malon is to teach you a different message, and that is Dafilu Bitoy Chayvu Deika Chayvu Deleka Mitzvah. Even a daughter, there's no chayv, but there is a mitzvah, because you might have thought that there's not even a mitzvah to support the daughter because she doesn't learn Torah. Kamash Malon, that there is a mitzvah. And that's why the Mishnah focused on Bito. Or we can say that it goes like Rabbi Yehuda, who also holds it's a mitzvah on both. A person is not chayv to support his daughter because of zilusa. Surely he's not responsible to support his son where there's no problem of zilusa. But there is a mitzvah to support his son. The kavachomer levanois, and surely there's a mitzvah to support his daughters, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that we're more concerned about the daughters because it's humiliating, it's shaming for them if they don't have finesse. So once again, why did the Tana focus on Bitoy if in fact Rabbi Yehuda holds Allah is the same for girls or for boys? Hakamash Malon, Tafilu Bitoy Chayva, even his daughter Chayva Leka, even though it's a daughter and there's Dilusa, there's no Chiv, there's only a mitzvah. And or we can say that our Mishnah is following the Shita of Rabbi Yechon ben Breka, where there's no chiv at all to support anybody. He's not much to support his daughter, nor his son. And there's not even a mitzvah, according to Rabbi Yechon ben Breka. Since Banois, after Mises Avian, there is a chiv for him to support them, it's in the Ksuba. Tananami Einay Chayev. That's what used the lashon of Einay Chayev, because it wants to juxtapose it to after the Misa where there is a Chiv. So our Mishnah is consistent with everybody, but that means that our original understanding of the Mishnah is no longer valid. Our original understanding was that there's a Chiv to Banos and a mitzvah for Banos. That's no longer true. Either Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda hold that there's a mitzvah for Banos and for Banim, or like Rabbi Yechon ben Breka, that there's no mitzvah for Banos and for Banim. So let's have a look. I'm sorry, it's a little bit later. So Amar Abaloi, Amar Shlokish, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina. Okay, so before we start this, we're starting a new sugya of Takanas Usha. Usha was one of the places that the Bezdin went to when they were in Golos. After the Sanhedrin was uprooted from their place on Harabayas, the Sanhedrin bounced around from place to place. And actually, if you look through the history, you'll see that the Sanhedrin was operating in Usha twice. They were in Usha that to evacuate, and then they came back to Usha. Usha is in the northern part of Eretz Yisrael. The final place where the Bezdin was before it shut down was in Tveria. And the Rambam actually writes by Riches that the final Bezdin, the final Sanhedrin was in Tveria, and when Mashiach comes, the Sanhedrin is going to resume in Tveria, and then from Tveria they're going to go up to Eretz Yisrael. And the legend has it that's why the Rambam was very, very focused and driven to be buried in Tveria. The Rambam is buried in Tveria because he wanted to be part of the first Sanhedrin when Mashiach comes, so he wanted to make sure to be right there. So anyway, so we're going to first discuss the very first takana, at least that our Mishnah is listing of the takana susha. But it's important to note the yichus brief of who's saying this. Amar Baloi, Amar Shlokish, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina. So there's a chain of three people that the Gemara is introducing when it's telling us about the first takana that occurred in Usha. That was Eskinu Shei Adam Zon Esbanov Vespenoisov Keshen Ktan. Until this point, there was no chiyuv at all. Now they developed a chiyuv, a takana chiyuv, support the children when they're young. So let's see Tosfos, how young. Zog Tosfos, Keshem Ktanim. Aval Ketane Ktanim, which means up until they're 6 years old, L'chula al Machai. That's not a takana. Me'ikar adin, when your children up until 6 years old, your children are gedolim, are ketanim, and you have to support them. Kida Omar b'soif afalpi. Ketana means up until they become adults, until they have Shnei Cyrus, until they're bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah. So that Kodesh Usha extended the chiyuv to support your children until they became adults. Frank the Gemara. The Gemara wants to know, Hilchas HaKavasei or Ein Hilchas HaKavasei? Was there in fact, do we pass in fact, there's a takana where it's mandated, where you're mechuyev, or is that not halacha? And in fact, there's no chiyuv, even up till the point where they're an adult. Toshma, ki have also la kamed Rabbi Yehuda, when people who refuse to support their children would be presented to Rabbi Yehuda, Omalu, he would tell them, Yarud lo yolda, v'abeninasa shadya. Yaroid, Rashi says a yaroid is, he says it's an animal that's achzori al banav. It's a town ma'oin tanin. It sounds like town is like a big fish. Right. I know article translated as a jackal, but it seems from Rashi's tanin. I think tanin means a fish. So I'm not sure where the article gets it from, unless he's quoting from a different region. But
and a reptile.
So whatever the case is, he said, a yared yolda, you're giving birth. The hito parnasasan al are here, and you're going to allow everybody else to support him. So from there you have a raya, in fact, that there was no chiyuv, because if there was a chiyuv, he would force him. He's not forcing him; he's just embarrassing him. So it seems to be a raya that, in fact, there was no chiyuv to support. When these family deserters would come to Reb Chisda, Amalu, he would say, "Kafulay asisa b'tzibur." Let's give him a soapbox. Let's take a mortar, which is the bowl in the mortar pestle set, turn it over, and let him stand on top of it like a soapbox. V'lema, let him say, "Urva bo b'nei." Even a raven who's known not to be such a merciful bird wants its children to take care of its children. But who gavra? But this low life, loy boy b'nei, he's not even going to take care of his children. And Rashi brings down two pshatim: either we forced him to make that announcement, or the announcement is made about him. But once again, you were trying to humiliate him and pressure him into supporting, but we cannot force him. Frank the Gemara, the orva boy b'nei. Are you telling me that an orev does take care of its children? V'aksiv livnei orev asher yikro. The Governor Melch tells us that they cry out to Hashem to b'nei orev because their parents don't support them. So to Maloi Kasha, it's not shver. It depends on the animals. An orev is normally black. When their children are born, they're white. And the orev doesn't even recognize these white birds as their children. So they ignore them. But once they get older, these birds, and they become black, the orev realizes that they're their children. So yes, there are some cases where orev who don't take care of their children. But the orev does take care of the children ultimately. So therefore it makes sense what we're saying, that an orev takes care of his children, but this low life doesn't. Also, when they would come in front of Rava, Amar Lei, he would say, I don't understand, you're not supporting your kids? You're satisfied that your children should live off tzedakah? Now, V'loy Amran, this that we pressure but don't force, is El V'loy Amid. If he's not a man of means, if he's not a wealthy man. Avol Amid, if he's wealthy, and it's not a stress for him to support it all, then Kafinin Lei Al Korche, then you force him. Under what grounds could you force him? If there's no chiyuv, how could you force him? So Rashi tells us there is a method with how we could force him. Why? Because it says, Lo yehei el tzedakah ba'alma. You could force a wealthy person to give tzedakah. These children who have no one to support them, they're no different than any other tzedakah. And that's the mechanism with which you can force a wealthy person. He had the Rava, just like Rava, Kafye le Rav Nosson bar Ami. He forced Rav Nosson bar Ami, Ba'avik minei dalad meizuz l'tzedakah, and he made him give tzedakah. I don't know if this was about his children, but Nosson bar Ami is a wealthy man, and Rav forced him to contribute to some type of a collection that was made in the city. Amar Abaloy Amar Shlokish. Now we have another takana that we're discussing, but this time there's no three people in the email chain. It's only two people. It's Amar Abaloy Amar Shlokish. Right? There's no third person. And he said another takana. Usha skinu, and Usha they were masakin. Hakosh of kol nechosov levanov. What if someone writes over all of his possessions to his children in his lifetime. Like everybody knows the joke where someone wrote over, he sold his house and he wrote over everything to his children. And the deal was he had 12 children, and every month he was going to live by one of the 12 children, right? It's a famous joke. And one day he's sitting homeless on the street, and his friend asked him, I don't understand. I thought you have an arrangement. He said, I do. But this year there's an embryo, right? So if someone writes over all of his assets to his children, there's a takana that who they have to support him with the money that he gave them, you think. So that was the second takana. So Reb Zera had a kasha, This is a chiddush that if he gives his assets to his children, they have to support him. There's even a bigger chiddush that was said, and that is almanosai nizoynes minachasav. So therefore, surely him and his wife, yes. What's the case of almanosai nizoynes minachasav? I'll quickly explain it outside, then we'll learn it inside. And as follows: the halacha is that a man dies, his wife, his widow, gets to sustain herself with the assets of her late husband. What if they only have one daughter and a man dies? Who yarshins everything? His daughter. Her daughter gets married, and now the husband, the daughter gets married and dies, and now her husband yarshins everything from his wife. So now the question is, the assets now belong to the son-in-law. Does the son-in-law have to now support the mother-in-law with the assets that he got that are really originally from his father-in-law's assets that were there to support his mother? The halacha is we force him to support her. So if we force the son-in-law to support her, surely if you give your assets to your children, they have to support you. The Shalach Rabin Be'irte in a letter, Mishemei, someone died, and he left over a wife who was an almana, ubas, and a daughter who yashined his estate. So of course, almanatzoi nizonis minachasav. Even though his daughter is in ownership of the estate, of course she has to feed her mother. The mother has a right to take mizonis on that estate. But what if Nisis Abbas? What if she now got married and now the assets have transferred over to her husband? Almanatzoi nizonis minachasav. She could still take from those assets. What if Mesa Abbas? And now the nechazim belong completely to the husband who yarshin them 100%. Amr Rav Yehuda ben Achaisai, so Yosy bar Chanina, al Yadi Haisa Maisa. There was a story like that. But Amr, when we paskin, almanosai nizonis minachasav. The almana can still take money from the son-in-law because she's entitled to be supported by the tzubah. So if we say that, hu v'ishtemi boy, surely if it's him and his wife that gave the money to the children, surely they should have a right to live off it. Zok Gemara, of course. So what's the chiddush? Mal detema hasamu delechka detarach. For an almana who doesn't have a husband, who's helpless, her will say even the son-in-law after Yash and everything, he still has to support her. Avalacha, the sons could tell the father, you want to schnorr, you want to mooch off us? Get a job. That's what they can tell the father. How ironic. The kids are going to say, Tati, you coming out to schnorr from us? He just gave them everything he owns. Now you're going to come be a schnorr from us? Tati, you want to pronounce it? Get a job. Kamash Milan, that they cannot say that. Gewaltig. Iboilu. Hilchasa kavasei, or less hilchasa kavasei. In what is halacha like him or not? In other words, can you, if you give all your nechazim to your children, can you force them to support you? Tashma, Reb Chanina, Reb Yonasan have a kainu. They were sitting around. Asau Gavra, and someone came over. The Gochin v'noshkin Reb Yonasan akari. He bent down and kissed Reb Yonasan's feet. He was so grateful to Reb Yonasan. Why was he so grateful to Reb Yonasan? Amalei Reb Chanina, my high. Why is he so grateful to you that he's kissing your feet, your knees? Amalei, because he was a victim of his children. He wrote over all his assets to his children, and then they wanted to throw him out on the street. And I coerced them into supporting their father. If halachically I couldn't force them, that's why I had to coerce them, and that's why he was so grateful to me. because minadin, he could have been out on the streets. Eliyah Medina, Asiyana boy, did I have to pressure them? We could have forced them. So you have a raya from here that if someone gives his nechasim to his children, they don't have to support it. Okay, so that's the Gemara. But halacha l'maisa, there's a lot going on over here. A lot of interesting shadows that come out of our Gemara. Halacha l'maisa, up until what point do you have to support your children? So Rav Moshe Paskins, that now, why was it only until 6, until 12? Because in those days, that's when children went to work and they would become self-sufficient. Nowadays, like we said yesterday, people become self-sufficient somewhere between 75 and 80 years old. A person is mechuyev to support his children until they're adults, until they're independent. That's the chiyuv nowadays. Halacha l'maiser or Moshe Paskins. What's the nafkamina if it's a chiyuv or if it's benevolence? The nafkamina is if you can do it with Moshe Meiser. If Moshe Paskins, you're not allowed to support your children with Meiser money. You can support somebody else's children with Meiser money, but you cannot support your own children with Meiser money because that's not tzedakah. That's already a chiyuv. That I was thinking about the same thing. You can do the reciprocal. I'm sure the fellow who's taking welfare for his kids is probably supporting his friend's kids now too, using Meiser money. I'll call upon him. So that's the first psak halacha. Second psak halacha is we see that you humiliate somebody, you put him on the soapbox and you humiliate him if he doesn't want to pay. Right? That's the halacha. That's what the Gemara says. So a shayla came to Rabbi Yashiv. What happens if you live in an apartment building and everybody has to chip in? It's called I forgot what it's called in Israel. The Bedek Habayis. Everyone's got to chip in to support the upkeep of the building. What if someone refuses to? Are you allowed to put up a sign and be mavaza him that the tenant in the apartment 1A, the Friedman family, they're not contributing to the Bedek Habayis like they have to? So Rabbi Yashiv Paskin, you're allowed to. Now don't make any decisions based on this. You have to ask your own Rav. But he Paskin that it's not lashon hara. It's no different than what was done over here. That you're allowed to publicize somebody who's not paying his fair share. I'm sure, of course, that's only if he can afford to. But that's how halacha l'maisa. Then you might ask, what happens if someone, and it happens nowadays, this child came to Rabbi Yashiv, people who have children who are very disabled or very sick, some of them abandon their children in the hospital. I don't know if it's a common occurrence, but it's definitely enough of an occurrence that needs to be discussed. Parents who abandon their children in the hospital. Is the halacha, are you supposed to be mavazah those parents? We know which babies were abandoned. Maybe there should be a kol korah that go out to humiliate parents who are due to such terrible circumstances, abandon their children. So, Rabbi Yashiv Paskin, avada, you're not allowed to, because it's not out of achzorius that they're abandoning their children. It's out of desperation. It's out of extreme pain and difficulty that they're not able to either afford to take care of them or they're not able to physically take care of them. Avada, you're not allowed to embarrass them. And he brings a tshuva that came to, I forgot who the tshuva came to before the war. It's an older tshuva. I forgot who it came to, but it was a tshuva. A baby showed up on this Rav's doorstep on an Erev Shabbos. And it says, we're very poor, we can't afford to keep this baby. It was actually a healthy baby. So please find it a home. Please find it a home. And by the way, the baby was born last Shabbos. So tomorrow, this baby needs a bris, and it was signed Yosef ben Shimon. So they didn't know who it was from, but it was signed. So the whole Shaila, so this big rabbi, I forgot, it's a famous sefer, I forgot who it was, he's clearing if the child is in a Sufi, or maybe because there's a signature, we know it came from a Kosher Yid, and he has a whole bunch of shilas about how to deal with the child. But the one shilas of Rabbi Yashiv didn't come up at all, that you have to publicize and be mavazah. Because avada, this is not a scenario where this would apply. Avada, there you wouldn't be able to embarrass somebody because it's a terrible, terrible, tragic thing. It's not something that someone's just refusing to support his children, and therefore it requires any type of publicity. Okay, so we'll stop here and we'll leave tomorrow. Have a good day.